understanding about what they can and they can't do under the law.
Thank you. Ruth Edwards. Ruth Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to start just by reiterating the Chair's thanks to both of you, Simon and to Paul, and to your members and all police officers for the incredible work you're doing at the moment. I think we recognise that we are asking you to do a very difficult thing, which is a huge contrast to the way of life that we're used to in the United Kingdom. And I wanted to start by asking you, you mentioned how quickly that quite a large body of law has come into play. How confident do your members feel at the moment about enforcing those new laws?
You're absolutely right. And Paul touched on it earlier, the scope and the scale at which we've moved is huge, it's unprecedented. My members didn't feel confident initially, mainly because they were getting conflicting messages. And that's why you saw different areas perhaps interpreting things differently. As we've been able to really reinforce that training, as we've been able to see more and more examples of really good practice, really good policing, overtaking the narrative that was quite negative in some parts of the media and quite unfair. We saw so many areas where my colleagues were just engaging with the public, taking shopping to vulnerable people, helping people to cope and to get their heads around this incredible restriction that we've all got on us. As we've seen that start to take over the narrative as well, that's given my colleagues more confidence in applying the common sense approach. And let's not get distracted by some of the mistakes that might have been made at the beginning.
Sure. Paul Griffiths.
I think very early on, there was probably some confusion around, there was a real need for a clear and consistent message, both from the government, from police and other agencies about what this meant. And I think a lot of officers actually relied on the policy intent clearly before the law was enacted. And the policy intent was exactly what we needed under the scientific evidence to keep people apart and trying to stop the spread of this disease. But as it was introduced in terms of law, that's when we started to try and be more consistent and cohesive in terms of the messaging and guidance that was coming from MPCC and also the College of Policing. Were there mistakes? Yes, there probably were. Were there times that it could have been misinterpreted? Yes, there probably was. But actually the intent of the police service and the intent of what we're trying to achieve here was absolutely clear to everybody. It was just the nuances with understanding the particulars of the regulations and the law.
Do you think, in your opinion, has that been ironed out now, perhaps particularly amongst the public as well as officers? Because I know there are some examples, for example, government guidance is that you only leave your house once a day for exercise, but that actually isn't actually stipulated in the regulations in England, which is a potential source of confusion. Have you been finding that as a source of confusion, or have people been much more sort of willing to follow sort of instructions when they engage with your officers?
I think in a broad sense, the clarity and the fog is clearing for the police service in terms of the approach and the strategy, and also what the law means and the best way of dealing with the communities in which our officers serve. I would reiterate what I've said previously, is we need to keep the momentum going on a communication strategy with the public. We need to maintain that pressure of understanding to make sure that everybody understands what they can and they can't do, what is a reasonable excuse for leaving the home. And I think that needs to continue by all agencies.
Okay, Simon Kempton.
I could only absolutely agree. I think the government message has to be so strong because the stakes are so high, but it must be aligned to what the legislation and the regulations state, because otherwise that breeds confusion for the public, importantly, but also for me. When I do my next shift and I'm enforcing these regulations, I need to be clear in my mind so that I'm not letting the public down.
And just a last question from me along these lines. We have, that we set out what are reasonable activities to leave home for. How do police officers verify that people are doing what they claim they are doing when they leave their home? Because I mean, obviously there are some famous examples of the gentleman who had a car full of window frames and his wife in the boot, where he fairly obviously is not leaving home to go to the supermarket or whatever. But how would you try and verify in those encounters you have with people that people are leaving home for one of those excuses? Because it seems to me like it must be quite difficult.
You're absolutely right, and to an extent, very, very, I mean, close to being impossible. If I stop somebody on the canal towpath jogging and I engage with them, as the suggestion is, as my training says, and they tell me this is my first jog of the day, I'm not likely to start following them as they jog, because you make sure they go home again. So that engagement period there, that's really vital. The explanation, because that gets the member of the public, even if it's their third jog of the day, that's where I can influence them, not today, but tomorrow. So tomorrow they'll say, well, you know, I get it now, I'll only go for one jog. Because we don't live in a police state and none of us want to. And that verification process, that's the end of the line, that's the fourth E. What I want to do is, even if I've really caught them doing something, and even if we both know they shouldn't have done it, let's try and deal with it by education. Let's try and help them to understand so that they don't do it again.
Sure.
Thankfully, we've got a long history of engagement with the public. We've got a group of people who are very inquisitive by nature and have got the ability to communicate effectively. We know what our strategy is, we know what we've got to communicate. So we just ask the line of questioning that's necessary and the encouragement to do the right thing, which is about protecting the NHS.
Thank you. No more questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.